When it comes to local body elections, the vast majority of people just don't care. If they did, more than 39% of us would have voted in October last year. In Auckland, that figure was the lowest in the country at just over 29%. The exception was the Otara Papatoetoe ward, where fierce campaigning led to a city-high turnout of 31.6%, enrolments up by 7.5%. But then...
A major development in local politics. A district court judge has overturned the results of the Otara Papatoetoe local board election, paving the way for a by-election in the Papatoetoe subdivision. The decision follows petition to the Monago District Court over alleged voting irregularities.
Kia ora, I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, the highly unusual court challenges to an election result, allegations of fraud, corruption and racism, and a community that decided to step up and got slapped down. I'll be speaking to RNZ Asia Pacific reporter Blessin Tom, who's got his ear to the ground locally, and Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes about the legal side of things. But first, Newsroom's Tim Murphy lays it all out for us.
First out, pity the poor people of Papatoetoe having to vote twice in about 4 months. Last October, in the local body elections, the votes for local boards, 21 of them, are held at the same time as the mayoralty and the council. The local board out there is a joint one between Otara and Papatoetoe. 4 of the people are elected from Papatoetoe. In that election, a completely new ticket of all Indian ethnicity candidates won all 4 seats and won them well, to a surprise, because Labour usually dominates South Auckland and Papatoetoe and Otara. So there was some raised eyebrows immediately at the scale of this victory and the rare way of that happening. And eventually there were complaints made that there must have been, and then there were some found, some kind of electoral fraud. No one said it was by those 4 candidates, but there's implication that you've been the beneficiaries winning, therefore something's amiss. And a petition was launched by one of the Labour candidates to the district court, and the district court said, well, there's evidence of some vote fraud, and we can't tell if there's evidence of a lot more, so we'll nullify the election, which is very rare, and do it again.
Here's the Labour incumbent, V. Hausia, who petitioned the court to overturn the result.
I'd rather us not be in the situation in the first place, but I do feel a sense of relief that the concerns that the people of Papatoetoe saw, that they experienced, that they witnessed, has been reviewed by the court, and the ruling has been made in favour of protecting our democracy, which is what all of this effort was about in the first place.
What was the evidence? What is alleged to have happened?
Yeah, there were votes that were taken, voting papers from people's letterboxes. About 79 had been identified by that point. As it turns out, the returning officer had been able to identify 50 of those where the householder had said, my voting papers haven't come, I want to vote a special vote. And they were able to see there were 2 votes out of that house. So 50 were made, 50 the false ones were made redundant, if you like. And there were another 20-something still outstanding. So there were voting papers taken by persons unknown. Normally that kind of conduct is subject to a criminal inquiry, and the police were and sort of are trying to work out what happened. There were rumours put out there about bands of young teenage boys going out stealing voting papers and things and so on. But as it turns out, and as the winning ticket, the Papatoetoe Otara Action Team, as they point out, there's no video anywhere of anyone loitering around any letterbox. There's no security film from a property or even a doorbell ringer video anywhere, not one of the 79 or any others. And so they're saying these stories have been kind of exaggerated. They've condemned the actual voting fraud, say they were nowhere near it and hadn't expected to win, and they were innocent of it.
How many of these fraudulent voting papers were in the action team's favour?
Well, most. And this is the thing.
Okay.
In the district court, the evidence came out that most had voted their way. And they're saying, well, that could have been someone trying to do something to boost us. It could have been mischief, or they even say it could have been a false flag, someone trying to make them look bad. So, you can't tell. It's a bit grey. As I say, the district court judge said, well, I'm seeing evidence of fraudulent votes. The kind of threshold for the district court to decide on a petition is that there has to be a material risk to the result. And of course, even if you allowed that there were 79 fake ones, the minimum margin that the new tickets candidates won by was 1,000 plus. So you could argue, as they did at the High Court, this wasn't material. It's 0.2% of the remaining votes of the margin were fake. However, they lost at the High Court because basically in New Zealand, the district court gets to decide as the first court you can go to after an election. And the reason that low court gets to sort of the final say is so that people can't delay and string out an election. There's got to be a decision, and there was on this one, and that decision was do it again.
And I guess to argue the case, just because there were 79 complaints of missing voter papers doesn't mean that there weren't a lot more where people didn't actually care if the voter papers turned up in the letterbox.
And that's the mystery, and that's what the district court judge said. I can't rule out that there weren't a lot more.
Right.
And the Labour candidate, V. Hausia, who brought the petition, sort of says that it could have been thousands, he says. And he's saying that as supposition, but he thinks with good basis.
Right. Why didn't the Action team get to argue their case in the district court? Because they had some pretty good arguments in their favour, didn't they?
Yeah, this was pivotal to all of this in some ways. They didn't go, when the district court said we'll have the petition, the judge or the presiding officer at the time said alert all the affected parties. The district court didn't alert the Action team, and they've since admitted to that in the High Court, saying they didn't know where to get hold of them, which is a bit bizarre given that by that stage they were elected members of the Auckland Council's local board.
They didn't have to show up because they weren't directly being challenged.
Law Professor Andrew Geddes with more on this.
So the allegation wasn't that they individually had done anything wrong. Rather, the claim was that the overall vote was tainted by alleged double voting and voting by people who weren't entitled to vote, etc. The Action team claim that they weren't given enough details about what the court case was going to involve, so they didn't feel they needed to be there. I think that that's probably a bit of a stretch. It was pretty obvious that their election was being challenged. It was obvious that it was being challenged on the basis that voting processes had taken place that shouldn't have. And with hindsight, it was a bad tactical error for them not to be there in the court to provide their own explanation for why it was that they were so successful. Because by not providing that counter-narrative, it in essence allowed the petitioners to, basically tell the story, a story that in the end the judge accepted.
Do you think if they had turned up and put their case that the result could have been different?
I think there's a reasonable chance of that. The Action team could have said, hey, look, here's how we campaigned. Here's how we did things different. So, yeah, of course, our election looks different other places because we conducted our campaign and we did things no one else was doing. And if that story had been told more clearly and more consistently at the district court level, there's a good chance the district court judge might have said, well, actually, you know what? That probably explains the result. And so whatever inconsistencies and invalid votes were cast, those weren't the reason why the result is what it is.
Tim has some examples of the possible reasons.
During the district court case, the petition raised all sorts of issues about particular roads that had, say, 3 votes last election in 2022 and this time had 15, or had 12 and then had 45. They've looked at all those roads very methodically with the help of a top barrister who took their High Court case and found that some of those roads, for example, the 3 to 15, there'd been 20 new houses built on that street. Another one of the roads where there'd been a big increase, one of their candidates lived on the street and held a cottage meeting and convinced everybody of his neighbours that they should get out. So they had some reasons that were, plausible and might have been aired and might or might not have, added to the judge's kind of understanding of why the turnout was higher. Interestingly, the enrolment was also higher, and as their lawyer at the High Court said, the whole point within the Electoral Act is to boost enrolment. Enrolment was boosted here, but the District Court judge kind of looked sideways at it and said, that can't be on.
The problem was the Action Party chose not to turn up and tell their side, and so they're kind of stuck with the outcome they got. Just to be clear, though, the court did not find that the Action Party members had anything to do with it. It could simply have been some completely independent people, over-enthusiastic supporters, not connected to the official campaign, who went out and did something wrong. And so we do need to be careful that we don't point the fingers at any individuals and say that they were involved in the wrongdoing. Now, they may have benefited from the wrongdoing, as the district court found, but they were not directly responsible for it. There's been no court finding to that effect.
An effort to drive home that message was one of the reasons the action team then went to the High Court.
We were not guilty. Neither we were found guilty, nor there anything in the judgment of the district court that says me or anyone, any of my teammates or my team alone were involved in anything or any wrongdoing whatsoever. But the way it was portrayed for us, we had to clean that thing on our names. So we decided that we're going to challenge this in the High Court.
What was the High Court able to say in terms of the action team being implicated in the fraud? Was it able to make any statement that said not necessarily your guys at fault?
They wanted an explicit declaration to that end. One of the things they sought. The first thing was that it should be, that the petition ought to be set aside. The district court's decision to nullify the election should be set aside for a couple of reasons under judicial review. But that failed. The other, they said if we fail, we would want some declarations by the High Court saying that, we didn't do it. The judge declined to do that because she said that the district court judgment didn't impugn them. It might have said there needed to be a new election, but it never said it was them. So, and she did say that they are people who condemn it, that the district court didn't impugn them and sort of imply it was them or their people. And so it would be no point in her restating that. They've used that High Court judgment that there hasn't been impugning to sort of fly a flag for themselves. Labor tends to be using the district court judgment saying there may have been widespread fraud here. And so Labor is running on a banner and a sort of a slogan of protecting New Zealand democracy.
That's kind of insidious, isn't it? I mean, that is basically linking the Indian community with corruption.
They would say not. They'd just say we've had democracy challenged. It's been proven by a petition going to the district court, and we want to sort of stand up for democracy. So they're not getting into that, and they actually push back very hard against the race implication.
Do you think there is racism involved here?
Oh, almost certainly, not by the courts and not necessarily about individuals, but I think there's been a lot of talk and I've seen some videos of campaigning and races raised. These guys who stood blanched a lot at some sort of outside commentary, and Brian Tamaki, the Destiny Church leader, had come out saying, that sort of seizing control of a part of New Zealand and talking about immigrant, not necessarily Indian and not necessarily them, corruption in New Zealand and so on. So they're hurting from that. Yes, I think there is an obvious undercurrent, unspoken, but let's not pretend it's not there.
Bless and Tom says it wasn't a certainty that the action team would stand again.
They told us that it is very challenging, especially now that they've decided they are going to stand again, because there's no other way. They have to prove that their victory was, fair and square. But it is challenging to go out and campaign again and then convince people, and it is out in the public. People know that a fraud happened, and then Many of them within the community are blaming each other. There was even in the High Court judge, even though the case was dismissed, was basically saying that, none of the members were any part of any fraud. But then community was dragged along, which is the very sad part, even for the action team members. They were saying to us that, if one of them have done anything wrong, that person should be punished, not the community. And people talk in South Auckland, and it became this weird Indian community versus the other community issue in South Auckland, which was very sad because, they're all immigrants. I mean, we're all immigrants. And the communities were living, peacefully without any problems for so long. But then you have this rhetoric of, the migrant people from India coming and doing fraud in a country where this has never been heard of.
Right.
So that was the biggest challenge.
Does the community feel that there's an element of racism here, that they've been branded fraudsters?
Yes, they do. Especially, the members of the action team. They are facing this sort of task of trying to sort of convince people that they haven't done any fraud, even when they were not even party to the whole court proceedings.
I asked Blesson what sparked the sudden display of interest from the Indian community in public office.
So the Indian community in New Zealand is at a point where they feel like they need more political representation. And this is of the 2023 census, where we are now the third largest ethnic group in the country. About 6% of New Zealand is Indians. So we feel like we need to sort of be in the parliament, be in the councils, local boards, wherever we need the voice. The community feels like we need to stand up for it. And in the past, it's not been the case, and especially with migrant communities, when you move to a different country, you sort of first you think about the family, you think about the job, you think about settling the family, sending children to school and all of that. And now we are at a point where the community has been here for more than 100 years, but still we don't see that political representation. They grow up in a place where politics is part and parcel of their life. But then when they move to a different country, priorities change. And because of that, a lot of things that we like, we never follow, we never chase. But I think we are at a point where things are changing, where people feel like, we are showing our strength. We see more of our people, but we don't see more of our people in, places of power, or we want to be at the table where decisions are made.
Before the last year's local body elections, how many Indian board representatives were there?
There was only one, which is
in the country.
In the country. So it was just
who was it?
It was in the Papatoetoe in Mount Roskill, Ella Kumar. She was the only one. And it was a big surprise for, Answered Asia as well, because we were looking into this thing and we couldn't find many people. The only other South Asian member was Ashraf Chowdhury. He's of Pakistani descent.
Also had a profile because he's the former MP.
Yeah. So it was just them, and it was such a surprise because we were working on stories celebrating the Indian communities, 100 years in New Zealand, in Wellington, and now Auckland. But then there was only two people. And then we were also the community was also really upset that there weren't many people in the parliament. You see a lot of people in the election competing, but none of them got through. And part of the government, only Priyanka and Paramjit Parmar of ACT. But we want to see more.
And local bodies are sort of almost a stepping stone for that, aren't they?
Exactly.
Local board, then council.
Then council, yes.
Parliament. So how many candidates put their hands up last election from South Asia?
So for the local boards, so more than 60 candidates were identified or they belong to the Asian community in the Auckland region, and then 46% of them were of Indian descent.
A third of those standing won a seat, including clean sweeps in Flatbush and Papatoetoe. They'd campaigned hard out, explains the action team's Kunal Bala.
People didn't know who their local board members were, or they've never seen them. They didn't know anything about it. They didn't even know that local board elections exist. And that is where we found the turning point, and we started convincing everyone that you should vote, and these are the votes. Your local board members are responsible for the local decisions that are required for Papatoetoe, not other people, not your MPs are going to come and look after your parks. I think that was a very big turning point for the people. We tried to educate as many as we could.
If you look at the Indian community in New Zealand, almost a third of the community lives in South Auckland. And most of them are in the Otara, Papatoetoe and Howick local board area. So you have the population there. So what they were telling us was that many people who recently moved to New Zealand and started living in New Zealand have no idea of how local elections work, because in India it's different. In India it's just like general elections. You go to a booth, you vote, people represent from different parties, and it's very straightforward. But things are different here, postal voting system, and you don't see that many people participating in voting, especially for local elections as well. So what they were saying to us was that firstly they went and talked to people and tried to educate them about what local board was, who local board members were there, and they were saying that they didn't even know who their local board members were.
And I feel like they snuck up and took everybody by surprise, because there's a bit of complacency in local body elections, no exception in Papatoetoe.
Exactly. If you look at the past members, Indian community were never represented, especially in those subdivisions, even though there are many Indians. And then the other factor is the stuff that happened in the past few years, like crime has risen a lot, and these people are business owners as well. Ram raids, and if you go to Papatoetoe, you'd be very surprised to see that people who own businesses there are basically behind cages. So if you go to a jewelry store in Papatoetoe, they have these steel cages and you talk to people like you are in jail. So all these happened in the past few years when, ram raids were increasing and people were unhappy, especially business owners. So the Indian community could relate to that a lot, because most of them have local businesses. They are in dairy or they know people, their family will be in business. So those kind of things also help them to sort of realize that I think we need to raise our hands and stand for ourselves. And I think people sort of saw that as a good reason to vote for them.
This time round, there are 20 candidates to vote for, up from 13 last time. The deadline for postal voting is April the 9th. But postal voting is at the heart of the problem.
And this is a concern that some of the kind of people studying electoral law worry about, and it was sort of aired a bit in the two court cases.
Is it time to get rid of postal voting?
Well, and Auckland Council has had a review done of its election, separate to this local board election in general, and there was a lot of talk about, do we just go back to, like the general election, a day, polling booths, we all turn up or we don't, and those who don't, that's a choice, and you've got to recognise it. And I know Wayne Brown, the mayor, is very strong on that. Let's get back to that. He talks about that the national politicians don't have to endure this mail post box voting. Why should we?
In the meantime, the Otara Papatoetoe board isn't getting anything done, because 4 of its 7 members haven't been confirmed and it doesn't have a quorum. That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Phil Benj and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Tim Murphy, Blesson Tom and Andrew Geddes. I'm Alexia Russell. Mā te wā.